The real power in life is how to learn things so that you have that skill forever. I never thought about failure. I only thought about how to succeed.
Strap yourself in. Richard White's journey from rock muso to the 12th wealthiest Australian includes some incredible hits.
We were turning over $1 million a month.
And a back catalogue you'll want to hear. Starting out as a guitarist in his own band in the 1970s, Richard went on to repair guitars for Australian rock royalty, including AC/DC, Cold Chisel, Dragon and the Angels. 50 years on, he can still pull off a killer jam session with old mates. Angels stars and brothers Rick and John Brewster. Yet the odd thing is that this journey, which goes around the world to 170 countries, ends up in exactly the same place that it started. Richard White was born in Bexley, a modest inner southwest suburb of Sydney.
It's just a suburb. It's not actually especially, it's under the flight path, so it gets a bit of noise. It's just on a main road.
Today, White, the chief executive and founder of WiseTech, is one of Australia's richest people, with a personal fortune around $10 billion. And still, he's in Bexley. In fact, he's living in the exact same place that he grew up in, with his kids, his mum, and two mates. Reg, a guitarist he met when he was 17, and Tony, the drummer in his old band Jay, where Richard was the lead guitarist.
I grew up here. I went to school in Bexley Primary. I went to Sydney Tech High, which is sort of 6 blocks the other way.
His grandparents ran a reception centre. Weddings, christenings, birthdays, they were all a part of Richard White's upbringing.
At the age of 11, I was washing dishes.
Welcome to family business. But it wasn't all that the young Richard White was learning.
I see now that my grandparents were schooling me in a very subtle way. Every Friday they would have this ceremony of giving me my pay packet, and this is a little brown envelope with cash inside it. And I remember that brown envelope so vividly, like today, it's like just as it was yesterday. I don't remember how much money was in the thing, and I don't remember what I did with the money, but I remember the real sense of achievement by being paid for doing something valuable and hard work.
And that is the start of a career that will eventually accumulate a colossal wealth.
My mother spent a lot of time feeding me reading materials. She bought me the whole of the Encyclopedia Britannica, which I sort of snuck at night into the bed and read the encyclopedia. She bought me lots and lots of science fiction, science fantasy, and I read that, all of my early years and teen years. And I was a very, very good and very avid reader.
That is the same Mrs. Cherry White, now aged 90, living in that same Bexley house where she gave birth to Richard more than 50 years ago.
There was a house just down the back here. The wedding reception place was there, and then there was the big ballroom. There was a huge ballroom with a big chandelier.
And the family business on this site taught the need to be able to step up for anything.
The family, with a place like that, what happens was, no matter what, you had to learn to do everything. If the chef didn't turn up, you used to have to be able to cook. If a waitress didn't come, you have to do the waiting. He's even been in the bar when he, mixing the drinks. We all had to sort of learn to do everything.
But cherries were not the only unconventional lessons the young Richard White was learning. His father, John White, had quite different skills.
He had a workshop, a factory, a couple of blocks towards here from the school. So I'd walk from the school to his factory, and sort of 3:30 in the afternoon I'd be welding, and I'd be doing electrical things, and he'd be teaching me about compressors and the physics of things, and talking about Boyle's law of partial pressure and all sorts of stuff.
At that point in his life, you could have imagined a grown-up Richard White as an events manager, or maybe an engineer. But no, and again it's Cherry White's intervention that sparked the change.
And I'm not a bit musical.
No?
I don't know where he got
But
that from.
you bought me the chord organ when I was quite young.
I did, yes.
Why'd you buy him that?
I don't know. I used to buy him anything that I thought would keep him,
From there, the music took over. First at school, the cornet, then the trumpet. But as puberty hit, the brass band lost its gloss, and Richard picked up the guitar. There were brighter lights out there for this boy from Bexley.
Suddenly I'm playing with kids in the school, bass players and drummers and people who want to be singers, and suddenly we've got, in the latter part of high school, we've got a band.
Wow, so this changes your life in some ways. But for Richard White, there was always his father, his grounding.
And my father, to his great credit, said, look, you've got to have another skill. You can't just be a musician.
How many times has that lesson ever been heard by kids?
I picked up a pretty decent skill in refrigeration.
You're a rock guitarist who is also a fridge engineer. I guess everybody's got a different skill, don't they?
Right. But it's just another tool. It's just a thing that you learn.
With music front and centre, Richard at this age had no intention of being a fridge mechanic, but it was his ticket to becoming a rock and roller. At this stage, what do you look like?
Well, I'm tall and blonde and had a guitar around my neck.
Hair halfway down your back?
I had a pretty buffy haircut, yeah. My grandmother used to always tell me they needed to get a haircut.
So you're living the life, you're living the dream at this stage. You've got the band, you've got the whole thing.
Playing around, playing gigs, playing in pubs, playing in clubs, going out to Parramatta to the Parramatta Leagues Club, driving north to somewhere else, going out to the country to play at gigs and various tours. We had an agent, we were being booked. It was fun, but it became a drain.
Because you don't eventually become one of the wealthiest people in this country by ignoring the economic reality of your circumstances.
The problem is it's actually not at all profitable to be a musician, particularly a struggling musician.
So even then you're thinking about, hang on, am I making any money out of this? So at age 17, with his mate Reg, they found a book, How to Repair Guitars. They started work on their own instruments at first, but then others heard about their skills. And it's this book?
It's this book. I've kept it all these years. And I read this thing, cover to cover. It's actually How to Repair Guitars. It's got a foreword by B.B. King, a very famous blues player. And it takes you through the entire history of guitars and then all of the things that you do with guitars and how the strings work. And I went, I think I can do this. It basically turned my mind to being able to do something other than just be a starving musician. And then I started sort of showing other people because often when we're gigging, there's 2 or 3 other bands on the stage, on the set at the same time.
So what sort of bands?
I was at Hurstville Marina Centre and I ran into Angus and Malcolm from AC/DC. That's where I met them.
Hang on, but they would have been in their formative years if you're all at Hurstville.
Well, we were all just learning how to do stuff. None of us were successful in the real sense of the word back then.
So you're just all hanging out and you're trying to learn and try and get ahead.
And I just said, look, this is what I've done to my guitar. And he said, oh, great, can you work on my guitar? I met Rick Brewster at a gig in Wollongong. They just moved from being the Keystone Angels to being the Angels. Doc Neeson was still on bass, not even the singer. I told Rick about my guitar repair business called Rock Repairs, and he turned up at the house here and we did some work for him, and we hung out.
And hang out, they still do.
I used to come up here to his workshop at the back of his mother's house.
Where we are right now, the same place.
Yeah,
That must blow your mind a little.
It looked a bit different.
Yeah.
I've cleaned it up a bit.
But in those days, your musical career is really starting to advance pretty rapidly, I would have thought.
It was on the way.
Yeah.
We were just starting to write some good songs. We came from Adelaide, and first thing you do when you lob into somewhere like Sydney is, who do you go to for guitar, repairs, and Richard came up.
We met at a gig.
There were other rock legends that visited the rock repair shop.
I used to work with Tommy Emmanuel and Phil Emmanuel, and I did some work for Ian Moss from Cold Chisel. These are all, things that they didn't seem important at the time. They were just people. They're just stuff. They're people like me.
Rock repairs moved into central Sydney, conveniently right next door to a shop called Guitar City. And it worked. But eventually, Richard White figured out another very important business lesson.
I realised that the business was very successful, but it was based around my two hands. And that can't scale. So I couldn't go from that to something bigger.
So you worked that out as a 23 or 24-year-old.
I'm probably 25 by this stage.
What he worked out is that what you can scale is making things.
The guitar repair business was very successful and very profitable. Within a few months, I'd sold that business to my co-worker, and I was building lighting equipment.
It wasn't long before the lighting business was booming, thanks to some very famous clients. Richard had been contacted by Ray Hawkins, the lighting designer on tour with the Angels.
When we did the No Exit album in 79, the key song in that was No Exit. So Doc, being very theatrical, we wanted to create a situation on stage where it looked like he was imprisoned. So we physically built these lights, and we would set them up at 4 o'clock in the morning in Ray Hawkins' backyard, turn them on and go, yeah, that's great, and create a bit of smoke so you could see what was happening. And so it looked like prison bars, and Doc would go across the stage like trying to get out. And it was really quite dramatic.
Small version.
Pin spots, yeah.
Yeah.
But what we did is we amplified that up to a huge, really high-powered light, a parabolic reflector, and Ray and I sort of, through a series of experiments and accidents, created this thing, and I named it after Ray. I called it the Ray light.
With help from the Angels, the lighting business became very popular indeed.
Now it became a factory. Now I had employees. So now we're moving from own two hands to something that's very scalable, but suddenly there's finance issues, and you have to run a book of debtors, and you have to pay your creditors, and you have to have stock, and you have to have work safety, and you have to have all sorts of other things to learn. That was a very new experience, and I came very close to running out of money. So very, very early on I learned the real value of cash flow.
Do you ever look back and wonder whether you should have remained a rock guitarist, living that lifestyle, living the dream?
I have never really thought about what would I do differently if I did it again. I've never actually worried about getting it wrong. Getting it wrong is just part of getting it right. And I'm very respectful of the work that the Brewster Brothers have done, and the work that Angus and Malcolm and AC/DC have done, and many of those musicians have got much more tenacity than me for being musicians. I kind of gave up pretty quickly and went, I'd actually prefer to eat and pay my rent than do that.
Richard now was on a different journey, but still filled with a thirst for learning and the practical skills his father had taught him. Soon, the lighting business became quite different again.
What happened was that business became quite large, and therefore harder to fund and more complex to manage. And I was approached by the brothers Paul and David Mulholland from Jan's, which was a very substantial and well-established entertainment company. They did all the concert tours, they manufactured a lot of equipment, and they needed a lighting division. So I merged that company with Jan's, and I became the R&D manager. I was managing 4 engineers, all of whom had degrees, and I didn't have one.
Yes.
Now, my ability to create products in the lighting space was really directly from the skills that my father gave me, welding and metalwork, electrical. This all made sense. But we're now at the very start of the computer generation.
And at $1,699 for all this, you save $899. The personal computer that means business.
Richard White had gone from rock music to rubbing shoulders with Australian rock royalty. But his talent for starting and growing businesses was becoming very apparent. With the computer generation in its infancy and with no university degree or knowledge of how it all worked, Richard had to turn his mind to the modern way of doing things.
So I go out, I do this massive research thing about finding which computers can I buy. And this is before the IBM PC. And I settled on a Tandy TRS-80. It had to be cheap. It was probably the biggest benefit for it. But it also had a lot of books on how it worked. So I took it home, set it up, because I now had a computer and I started playing games on it first. And then I thought, how does this work? So I started reading the manuals and I started understanding how the computer worked, and I actually taught myself how to program.
With this new homegrown computer programming knowledge, Richard went about designing a computer-controlled lighting panel, the sort you see today at every concert or performance. But this was back in 1983, remember?
I had the engineers working with me so they could sort of teach me the pieces I didn't know. So I was sort of absorbing knowledge from them and reading books. And we designed the first version of the Jan's lighting control system called the Aurora, which was, I think, probably one of the first computer-controlled lighting systems in the world. I did all the hardware design for it, I wrote all the code for it, and I built all the sort of design work for it.
Just 2 years later, Richard's Aurora lighting computer desk was used for the Tears for Fears 1985 tour, when that band was at the peak of its star power. Richard left Jan's, but he didn't forget it. As his wealth accumulated, he went back and bought a significant but non-controlling stake in that business. In the 1980s, Richard set up a computer wholesale business. It sold computer equipment for brands like Unisys and Philips.
It scaled very well, but it had the same capital demands. So
Yes.
when you get big like that, and we were turning over $1 million a month within 12 months.
Wow.
And that was good, but it was actually kind of scary.
At what point does WiseTech start to emerge, and why logistics? Why does that become the issue?
Completely by accident, I ended up having 2 different freight forwarders who needed someone to help them with their computers, and particularly needed some little pieces of software to glue things together.
With WiseTech, Richard developed that software glue that helps solve huge logistical problems for some of the world's biggest freight companies, allowing goods to move seamlessly around the world. It's a process of many moving parts. Any consumer or business who orders a product from anywhere in the world must have those goods moved from the supplier's warehouse, then transported via rail, road or air, then through customs, possible health officials as well, before it's loaded onto another aircraft or ship. WiseTech software enables a smooth, trackable transition through all of them. Once your goods arrive, say in Australia, that process happens all over again.
That means that we have the capability to take all these complex processes, which are all very disjointed, and they're all done by different parties. The product that WiseTech provides, which is called CargoWise One, makes all of that into a single, seamless, straight-through process.
That success of WiseTech software is a game changer for moving goods. It now has 24 of the world's biggest 25 freight forwarders as its customers, which is why this is an incredible Australian and global success story. Richard and his partner Marie Isaacs in 1992 started the business with just 5 staff. Today, WiseTech employs almost 3,000 people. More than half of them are engineers who write software and develop the product.
We actually grew by taking very small baby steps. There was no big leap here. This was effort over time, a lot of sweat equity, a lot of intellect put into the software to make it better and better.
WiseTech is now among Australia's most valuable 20 companies, worth more than $25 billion. Back in 2016, when WiseTech shares first hit the stock market, they were $3.35. Today, they're more than 20 times higher, which makes Richard White and Marie among the richest people in Australia. Richard is listed as the 12th wealthiest, valued at close to $9 billion. Give me a little perspective of the success that you've had, financial success. I mean, I know it gets you better guitars and it gets you a nice music studio, all those sorts of things. Is it hard, even in your mind, to reconcile it or not?
It's very strange. It's hard to explain because it sort of happens around you and beneath you, and you don't sit down and plan to be wealthy. It's a side effect of being good at your job and good at the vision that WiseTech has created and the products that it's created.
But Richard White is not one to sit still. There's always another quest, to learn and to expand. And that's where Melanie Sellers comes in.
Actually pinged Richard on LinkedIn. I was looking for some solutions to a big challenge that we had, which was around shipping.
Melanie's Genix business helps to identify and to solve disease in farm animals through rapid testing. She was looking for the best way to get those test results to her customers, farmers, food companies and health authorities around the world.
Supply chain is very important. They need to get these tissue samples into Australia to their lab within a couple of days so they can then, within 24 hours, give an answer back to the customer. That requires a precision supply chain that has to be engendered with software capabilities that make that very easy.
Richard allows us to globalise and to scale. With Richard's experience in globalisation and how to take technology and apply that and be able to take such a special technology which is multipath and make that available to the world and to put it in the hands of farmers so that they can change food production and they can have better global food security. That's what this is about. It's about the scalability and the globalisation that Richard brings to Genix.
Not only did Melanie end up with the solution she needed, she also ended up with a curious investor, Richard White, who was keen to help her expand the business.
I like solving problems and I like helping founders, entrepreneurs. So that was in the sweet spot.
Australia, you see, has been historically a tough place to do business from. But with modern software and ingenuity, those barriers are dropping fast, with the help from a music buff from Bexley.
Our vision is to be the operating system for international logistics, and that's a vision that people used to stare at me and go, "You're completely mad. That's not going to happen." And now we're going, actually, he wasn't quite that mad as I thought.